Good evening and welcome to this slightly random episode of the Pandemic Podcast here on Friday night with me, Astin-Gregory. Join me for a drink whilst we chew the fat on all things senseless to make sense of a senseless world here on Friday night. So prepare for an unplanned, unstructured rant commentary on what's been going on over the last few days this week in the United Kingdom, trying to make sense of the world here in Common Sense Corner. So if you've been under a rock in the UK, if you're from the UK, been under a rock, you may have missed that this week we've seen COVID passes introduced in England. We can't call them vaccine passports, a very clever spin, which I'll come back to in a moment. We've seen the egregious introduction of vaccine mandates in the NHS next year, coming with the effect of spring. We'll talk about the hypocrisy of that as we go through, and various other nonsensical things that's been happening. Now, I want to start by talking about the build up to the vote on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we had the vote, which looked at four things. It looked at the vaccine passport / COVID passes in England. It looked at the NHS mandates. It looked at the removal of the self-isolation period for the unvaccinated, for the vaccinated rather, and there was a fourth thing that's escaped my memory, which shows how unimportant it was. Perhaps it was something really important, but the things that stand out are the vaccine passports and the NHS mandates. But I remember watching Keir Starmer make his announcement, the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party, the day before the vote, basically setting out how the Labour. This is a rantathon. Yes, Maria from the audience, thank you very much for your comment. This is a rantathon tonight. It's a very calm rantathon at the minute, but I have got a glass of red wine, and as it goes, we may see things escalate. But I saw this broadcast, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, speaking about how the Labour Party would be supporting the motion for vaccine passports, aka or COVID certification, aka vaccine passports, and supporting the all four of the measures: the vaccine passports and the vaccine mandates, the removal of the isolation period in favour of daily testing, and the other thing that's going to come to my mind shortly. I'm looking at my notes. I definitely did take notes. But the point he was making, the argument that he was making, is that the Labour Party would be voting in favour of these pieces on the basis of public interest. So I want to extrapolate this concept of the public interest here in Common Sense Corner on Friday night. Because what does it actually mean to act in the public interest? And this was something I took up with my local MP on the basis that he is a Labour Party member of Parliament, someone who voted in favour of these motions, despite my best efforts to try and persuade him otherwise. But this notion of acting in the public interest is something that has been mobilized throughout this entire pandemic. This idea of social solidarity, working together in the common interest to protect one another from this deadly virus. Am I advertising Amazon? There's a parcel up there I've received in an Amazon box. I'm not advertising for Amazon. Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. I don't even know. I can't remember what's in that box, but unfortunately, you can see. You can also see this growing array of toys which are emerging as this. My office is slowly becoming my son's bedroom for when he graduates to this separate room, which will become his. So you'll see me in a new location in the new year. But the public interest, doing the common good, protecting ourselves and protecting each other. I think this has been a concept that's been radically hijacked by the I'm trying to make sense of the political uh, ecosystem. I consider myself to be a pragmatic centrist, where I can kind of pick and choose the things. Damn you, Shield. Brilliant. The the left off the left and right that I find appealing. I can kind of take a balanced approach on the situation, um, which makes it awkward because uh, well, it doesn't make it awkward. It's awkward on the basis that the idea that anyone that criticizes public policy is in some way some far right or alt right individual, um, which may be true for some, but not true for us all. There's a very diverse blend of political leanings tackling this very situation. In fact, the majority of people on my team, at least half of them, come from the typical or the traditional left. Um, Desmond Swain didn't show up in the no list. Comment from Grant. He didn't, but this reveals a separate problem because after his impassioned, I know Maria, you're joking. I know. The the impassioned speech from Desmond Swain. Don't you just love it when Desmond Swain gets the? I mean, this is Common Sense Corner on a Friday night with a glass of wine, so we are going to go all over the place in this conversation. I've only had a couple of sips of the wine, so it's not the wine that's taking this conversation in a thousand directions. I'm also responding to the comments in here tonight. Swain, I love it when Desmond Swain. It's just like something great. It's some gold. This poetic. Anarchic libertarian rant is about to emerge, and in fact, I shouldn't even use the term libertarian because I'll comment on libertarian in a moment. The abuse of the term libertarian. I'll write that down to come back to the abuse of the term. But his vote was not counted. It wasn't that he voted; he didn't vote in accordance with the COVID recovery group. After that impassioned speech, it was that he had his vote had been he hadn't abstained. He was accused of abstaining. It hadn't appropriately been counted, and it turned out that there was 2 or 3 people whose vote hadn't properly been counted, which is a reflection of the wonderful democratic system that we have. Remember, cast your mind back to the Welsh vote for vaccine passports, where it went through by 1 vote when one of the MPs couldn't get on the Zoom call to levy his vote. And if you missed that story, that's a fact. Vaccine passports passed in Wales because 1 MP couldn't get on a Zoom call. That small matter of removing civil liberties irreparably and creating a discriminatory society down to the fact that 1 person couldn't get on the Zoom call. It wasn't like they were just discussing like the latest, whether they're going to plant a tree in the town square. It was whether they were going to remove civil liberties and enter into a world of medical apartheid. Anyway, we digress again. But Swain's vote wasn't appropriately counted. Several votes weren't counted properly in the House of Parliament. Not that it would have made any sense. It wasn't a narrow margin. We saw a massive increase in the resistance against vaccine passports. I think it was 126 voted against it, which is a huge uplift on where we've been. And we have to celebrate these small wins, otherwise we have nothing left to cling on to. But a huge amount of effort that went in the week prior to the vote. Huge respect to everyone who took part in the Together Week of Action, where we all connected with our MPs, looking to get surgery appointments, phone calls, letters. The results were clear. The number of statements that were made in opposition to vaccine passports in an impassioned way, where MPs referenced the communication, the specific communication that had been sent to the MPs from their constituents. So clearly the message is starting to get through to some. So it shows the importance of the relentless nature of communication when it comes to MPs. Our challenge with all of this, I was part of a strategy session recently, and I explained that strategy is important, but actually what strategy really is planning for how to best communicate your position and to help influence the position of another. That's really all this is trying to do, whether it's protesting, campaigning, writing to your MP. It's looking at how we can influence someone else's current perspective and shift it. Which is one of the ways that we win. Of course, public non-compliance is a fundamental basis of a fundamental tool in civil resistance. And again, but even persuading or influencing, rather elegantly influencing people to not comply still a form of communication. So all of this really, strategy is a much sexier word than communication when it comes to strategy, but it's all about communication. It's all about how we communicate with our MPs in order to, in some ways, become a help, not a hindrance. But we try and educate them on the issues, but also motivate them to take a different course of action, which is it is a great challenge given the false consensus that has been um, uh, inflicted upon us, a subject which I'll be delighted to be talking with Professor Matthias Desmet with on Monday. So for those of you who saw my interview with Matthias Desmet, which has gone viral, over 1 million views, several other people have gone on. Aubrey Marcus went on to interview Desmet. He's now on the circuit talking about the authoritarian, the 4 things that lead to authoritarianism and why people comply. He's back on Monday. We're going to talk about this false sense of consensus, which is used where it's a situation where it appears that all the data and all the science and all the evidence points in one direction, but indeed it's a fallacy. So we have that to contend with. We have this media machine to contend with, which is heavily influencing the public and indeed the politicians' perspectives when it comes to the vote. But the influence was palpable through that campaign. And I am going to circle right back to talk about what I originally started talking about, which is acting in the public interest. But I'll do that through commenting on those who voted in favour of vaccine passports and those who voted in favour for the NHS jabs, mandatory jabs. It's important to recognise the progress that was made in those who voted against those measures, firstly. Let's celebrate. We need to empower those who have the courage to go against the grain, and we need to. It's a classic. It's almost Pavlov's dog. We need to create an association, using behavioral science, the behavioral techniques that have been used against us to actually make people feel a sense of duty to doing the right thing and a sense of reward for doing the right thing. So it's important that we celebrate those that take the courageous action and create almost like a firewall around them so that we protect them from their critics on the Twitter sphere, for example. So we must reward and recognize those who are acting courageously in the interest of the issues that we speak about here on the show. And secondly, for those who do not act in the interest of the public, which I'll talk more about in a minute, for those who voted for vaccine mandates and those who voted for vaccine passports, it's important that we start to hold them to their democratic, the principles and the pillars of democracy. So, for instance, having had my MP Darren Jones fail to vote in against these measures, I'm going to be writing to Darren to ask him specifically in the lead up to the vote. I'm going to send a Freedom of Information request to his office, and I'll be asking the number of correspondence he's received asking for him to vote against the measures, and I'll be asking him to share the number of correspondence that's asking him to vote in favour of Plan B, because the MPs are supposed to represent the interests of their constituents. So firstly, based upon the level of correspondence that he has received, what is the balance of lobby that he has received from his constituents? That will be revealing, firstly. Secondly, when it comes to vaccine mandates, how many NHS staff has he personally engaged with within his ward, our constituency, to gauge their perspectives on whether these mandates are ethical and reasonable? Because, of course, the BMJ put the evidence out from the House of Lords report that came out, which said the evidence is insufficient to back mandatory vaccinations in the NHS. I'm sure he probably hasn't read that report, but how many NHS workers has he consulted with in advance of making his vote? And similarly, how many business owners in the area, in the constituency, has he consulted with about vaccine passports, given that they will be the ones that are administering these egregious discriminatory protocols? on the front lines, because we need to be holding these MPs to account for their decisions and for upholding the democratic process. I'll also be asking what other processes and what other methods that my MP, Darren Jones, has undertaken to gauge the perspectives of his constituents, given that this is a very, very important matter. And it's really, really important that he accurately represents his constituency. Now, I'll be fascinated to see what type of response that I get from this. But it also begs the importance of localized action. What was fantastic about the localized campaign that we did with the Together campaign last week was taking this on a local level, encouraging people to engage with their MPs, taking the protest to their door. Because, again, this comes back to influence, it comes back to communication, and the way that we communicate with our MPs on a local level can and will have influence if we get the right message and the right messenger and the right numbers of people communicating. So there is work to do. There is some work to do in our local communities. That's not just lobbying our MPs. That's also almost to the effect of going door to door. And I know there's groups out there right now. I've worked with a number of the different groups who are doing outreach, communicating with the local residents, working with local influencers, working with the local Chamber of Commerce, working with the local FSB, working with the local community groups to get a message out there that we've got to say no to these things and to tell a strong story why. Because all of the data and all the science, all the facts really suffer against this idea of working in the common good or in the public interest, which takes us full circle to where this conversation began. Because when Keir Starmer was talking about acting in the public interest and therefore supporting vaccine passports and supporting NHS mandates, you have to ask the question what it really means to act in the public interest. And the problem with all of these things, the policies, the mandates, the restrictions, is they're all predicated on layers upon layers of stacked assumptions that are actually false. Think about some of the principles that we've talked about repeatedly on this show. Let's take, for instance, the case numbers and the hospitalization data, which is still predicated on a PCR test within 28 days of testing positive, which even in the government's own literature shows that the PCR tests can reveal fragments of virus within 90 days of exposure. So the tests, therefore, aren't necessarily detecting live infectious cases. We know that. That's a fact. But this is something that's predicated, the case numbers predicate the policy. But we've also got the assumption that pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic transmission play a significant role in transmission. We also see this as an assumption that is falsely used. The other component here is this idea that herd immunity can only be obtained through vaccination. This is what we call the new paradigm of science. We have the old paradigm. I'm going to do loads on this in the new year. Is really exciting exciting to me at least. It's starting to unpack how we've got this old paradigm science and this new paradigm science. New paradigm science, which is not based on fact or the scientific process or scientific objectivity. It's based upon ideology, and this struck me. I'm building into a rant now. You can feel it. I've only had one sip of my wine. Good evening to you, by the way, if you're just joining us. I hope you had a good week. Here we are on Friday night, Common Sense Corner. A very short episode tonight because I've got to take care of the family tonight. My wife is heading out, so it's Dan's on daddy duty. But the new science is based upon ideology. These new paradigms. You'll notice things like herd immunity was invalidated very early on. In the Great Barrington Declaration came out. Think about how heavily that was criticized falsely. You know, the science is an ideological piece which prioritizes the commercial interests of the global public partnerships and the pharmaceutical industrial complex. Something which will be unraveling a lot more in the new year. But nonetheless. We've got this situation here whereby the ideology is overruling the objective science, and I saw this this. If you're like me, if you go on Twitter or social media, you'll always see. I deliberately follow those who are on the opposing view because I still want to have to challenge my own biases. I want to make sure that I'm not wedded to my position, that I myself, if I talk about objectivity and critical thinking, that I'm challenging those underlying assumptions and biases myself. So I follow some of those people who are quote unquote on the opposite side of the coin. And I'm sure you probably have the same if you see this. There are certain people that just whine, like instantly their comment is this stop messaging, which is clearly ideologically grounded. You see it and it just triggers you. Like there's a couple of people out there that trigger me like nothing. I have to breathe and I have to practice all my my spiritual development, my conscious awareness to kind of bring myself back to center. But I had this distinction the other day when I saw one of these particular scientists who talks about how the those who are criticizing the mass vaccination campaign are anti-science, and he goes on this entire anti-science rant, and how but then you read his entire feed and his science is all ideological. It's completely ideological. It's not grounded in fact. It's grounded in assumptions that aren't proven. And I was like, aha, distinction. Anti-science now means being anti the new paradigm that is not based upon the objective measures that we previously know, but it's based upon this new paradigm. So anti-science in his terms is anti the science, which is the guiding science, the guiding ideology, the guiding dogma that drives the pandemic response. I was like, brilliant distinction. I see what you mean. He isn't talking about anti-science as in being anti-scientific. He's talking about being anti-the science, which is this new wave of crazy ideological science based upon this idea of the common good and the public interest, going full circle back to the piece around Keir Starmer's speech. So what is the common good? What is it in the public interest? If you're going to follow a policy that increases the level of discrimination in society, if you're going to follow a policy that widens the equality gap or the inequalities in society, if you're going to pursue a policy that creates economic devastation, that increases the mental health challenges, that increases NHS the waiting list, which are now there's nearly 5.98 million people in an NHS waiting list, nearly 6 million people, nearly 500,000 people waiting over a year for elective surgery. It's insane, but surely. And destroying education, prioritizing these, closing down GP surgeries to prioritize the jabs when we've got like a record waiting list. We're talking about the public interest, eroding the very fabric of society, eroding trust in the political system, every major central institution. So we're talking about acting in the public interest from one myopic point of view, which goes back to the classic mistake of just focusing obsessively on cases, which is cases of COVID, cases of a virus. Goes back to my phrase, you cannot protect an entire forest by protecting just one tree. You could chain yourself to one tree in the forest whilst the bulldozers come in and take out the forest. Now, you think that's a noble duty, which is what is the mentality that is underpinning what we're seeing right now. It's this idea that we'll chain ourselves to this tree and just protect people from COVID cases. Meanwhile, the forest is getting bulldozed. The economy is collapsing. The healthcare system is collapsing. People's sanity is collapsing. The mental health crisis is emerging. Education is being ruined. The forest is getting bulldozed because we're obsessed by this one tree of COVID cases, which is predicated on all these false assumptions. And we have this limited evidence to this Omicron variant, which in all intents and purposes is a mild form of the virus, at least the early evidence. Yet we're freaking out and saying we're going to act in the public interest and enable vaccine passports, which are unscientific in the old paradigm, because the vaccines don't reduce or at least significantly reduce transmission. Therefore, the idea that you're going to enable to deny someone access to a nightclub or a venue because they're not vaccinated is just ludicrous. And in fact, what you're doing, and the reason why they say, we're getting really into common sense corner now. They're saying the reason we can't call it a vaccine passport is because in the UK we allow lateral flow tests as an alternative, which in one way is a benefit, because if you had excluded people purely on their vaccination status, that really is a medical apartheid. But we're still creating a paper society. We're still operating on this idea that we are proven, we are presumed sick until proven healthy with this method. But through this method, if you think about it, you get a green light if you've got a negative lateral flow. We haven't got time to talk about the flaws of the testing protocols. Or you get a green light if you've been double jabbed at this point in time until the goalposts move to triple jab, which they will. They will. Your pass will no longer be active. This is a vaccine sales aid. It's like this is business model gold, but it's ethically unfounded. So we have this situation where you can have a green light because you've tested negative on a lateral flow, which if you've genuinely done it and you have no symptoms, you can say what you like about the reliability of the test, and I've said plenty, but nonetheless, you are far less likely to actually be carrying the virus if you enter the venue with a negative lateral flow test than someone who's just purely got a green light because of their vaccine status. You can just walk in. I mean, there's some fantastic memes floating around the internet just showing like vaccinated people walking into buildings being completely loaded with infection, which it seems that Omicron is much more a function of the vaccinated, the unvaccinated. So you're just allowing people in because they've been vaccinated. You get your virtue signal pass, and then you go pass around the virus to all those who've got negative tests who haven't had the vaccine, and all of a sudden you get a super spreader event. It's literally insane. So public interest, no. Vaccine passports, COVID certification does not operate in the public interest. Let's talk about NHS mandates. NHS mandates. We've just seen what's happened in the care home. 40 to 50,000 jobs lost at the time where there's already hundreds of thousands of people waiting to get admitted into care or to receive new forms of care, decimating the care sector just before winter, although the deadlines are being pushed back to actually they're being pushed to the edge. We're now seeing this situation in the NHS with up to 100,000 people who are likely to be losing their jobs if they don't get vaccinated. In a healthcare service which is already underfunded, already overloaded, already understaffed, and we're saying we're gonna act in the public interest, right? Go back to the point number one: the vaccines don't stop transmission. So if your healthcare worker is vaccinated or not, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is whether they're sick or not. They're actually infectious, which has nothing to do with vaccine status. It has to do with your sickness status. So all of this is ludicrous. So this idea that it's this perception that it's for the public good, this public interest, is the thing it's the veil that we need to pierce, because it's the moralization of policy. This ideological argument over evidence is winning the battle at this moment in time. So we have to get smart in piercing the veil, breaking down that ideological argument, which is why I'm so excited about the new year. And I'm so excited about the new year for a few reasons. Number one, for the content on the Pandemic Podcast, it's not going to be called the Pandemic Podcast going forward. I'm going to rename it because it's no longer appropriate. But nonetheless, starting to call out the game, start to do content that really breaks down the mechanisms from the psychological, social, cultural perspective, from a philosophical point of view, that shows why this is happening, answering the question, why and how is this happening? And this ideological part, this moralization, this cultural slide into safetyism is one major component, with several major components. So breaking that down. So that's one of the reasons I'm excited. Secondly, I'm also very excited about looking at how we can build the future. I'm just looking at this idea of how do we resist and how do we reinvent, or how do we reimagine? Because right now we have this great opportunity where many of the systems and structures are revealing their flaws at scale. So there's this real great opportunity to start talking about how we can build a better future, but also now connecting into the local communities, talking to our people. We want to build our own online community for the audience that we've gathered over the course of the last 12 months, to start talking about these things and bringing people together so that we can start creating a network of conscious minds and empowered people, so that together we can start resisting and reimagining the world we live in. So I'm very excited for multiple reasons. Plus, there's just something symbolic about a new date in the diary, 2022, fresh start, off we go. Anyway, the public interest. What is the public interest? That's been one of the things we've talked about here on the Pandemic Podcast tonight in Common Sense Corner. The other piece I'm just going to leave you on is this sheer fallacy in the data. This growing, I posted about it on Facebook just this week. The elephant in the room is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In the UK, 1.3 million adverse reactions have been recorded via the yellow card scheme. And I had a quick look at the data. It's been a long time since I unraveled the data on the pandemic podcast, but this is the foundation that we built on, evaluating the science, the data. And I will still do more of this hard sense making. I call hard sense making, looking at the data and the science. But nonetheless, since the vaccine rollout, we've had, compared to the previous period prior to the vaccines being available, we've had an additional 7.1 million cases over and above what we had prior to the vaccines. You heard that right. Up until the point of the vaccine rollout, there was 1.7, close to 1.8 million cases registered on the government's coronavirus dashboard. After the vaccines were rolled out, that number has now accumulated to over 10 million, closing on 11 million. So there's been a 7.1 million additional above the number. So since the vaccines have been rolled out, that's cases. Now, okay, Common Sense Corner. We're here in Common Sense Corner. They've also gone from 43 million tests done at the point in which the vaccines were rolled out to now 378 million tests done over the last 2 years. So that's a 292 million increase on the previous period. So we've seen a massive increase in testing, which is quite clearly going to filter down into the cases. But nonetheless, we've also seen an additional 100. The number of people hospitalized prior to the vaccines being rolled out was 236,000. That's just with a positive test, which doesn't necessarily mean they're hospitalized with COVID. But since the vaccines have come out, that number's gone up to 610,000, which is a ginormous increase on the previous period. But if you look at the pure increase on the previous period, it's 138,000 people more than what we saw in the previous 12 months prior to the vaccines. And then lastly, on the deaths, the deaths have gone from 79,000 to 172,000 since the vaccines have been rolled out, which is, if you look at the difference over the two period, it's nearly 15,000 additional deaths over the period since the vaccines have been rolled out. So Common Sense Corner, adverse reactions have gone up, all-cause mortality has gone up, but the COVID measures have got worse. The aggregate COVID measures have got worse since the vaccines were rolled out. We've got to be able to talk about these numbers and ask questions. But isn't it fascinating how anyone that says anything negative or discouraging about the vaccines online, efficacy or safety, is deemed an anti-vaxxer? They're censored, they're deplatformed. But people are wising up. People are seeing, oh, wife's here, daddy duty time. Lizzie's at the door. So we've got to wise up to this. The elephant in the room is growing. This idea that we're acting in the public interest is flawed. It's time that we start to really we start to change the public story on this. Because hello, there's Zach. It's bath time. There's Lizzie and Zach. He's at his bath. I've missed his bath. Oh no. We need to start changing the story. We need to break down the narrative, calling out the game, recognizing the difference between the old and the new paradigm. The old paradigm of science, which is grounded in objectivity and critical thinking, and the new paradigm, which is the science grounded in ideology. We've got to shake this up, and we've got to write our own narrative. And we've got to start creating our own systems and structures moving into the future. We've got to connect deeply in our local communities, online and offline. And lastly, we got to continue to resist, because the more we resist, the more we push, the harder we push, the more crazy the authoritarian regimes become, and they become self-defeating. So there's an opportunity this weekend. If you're in England or the United Kingdom, there's a major march. There's a freedom rally taking place in London tomorrow, and we believe it's going to be one of the biggest yet. There's been some serious promotion behind this. We've seen some very influential athletes, media personalities, business personalities have been pushing this. People are waking up. It's going to be a very big march in London tomorrow from 12 o'clock, Parliament Square. We'll be there with the Pandemic Podcast, joining you. Looking forward to sharing that experience as we... I'm going to see if I can find a Santa hat, because it feels like we're trying to protect Christmas, because... there's rumors floating that either between Saturday and Monday, the government are going to make another announcement about Christmas. So hold on to your horses. Who will decide how you spend your Christmas this year? Make that decision right now, because it's either the government or it's you, or it might be your family. In my case, my wife's family, they'll have us. My family, they won't. They'll follow the rules. But love either way. So, how are you to spend your Christmas? I'm going to try and find a Santa hat, because we are fighting not only for Christmas, we're symbolically fighting for the right to family life, because the right to family life is eroded by these policies. We're fighting for the right to expression. We're fighting for the right of liberty. There are so many rights and freedoms that have been compromised by this new paradigm of ideological science that is driving much of this. So if you can make it tomorrow, do what you can to be there. This is going to be one of the largest marches that we've seen this year. I'm sure of it. I do think there are some regional and localized events happening for those of you who can't make it into London. But just find your way to contribute in whatever way you can, whether that's speaking out online, talking to your neighborhood. Just get involved. Find a way to speak out tomorrow. Take a stand. Take a stand for freedom, and take a stand against this tyrannical regime that is emerging. So Parliament Square, 12 o'clock tomorrow, is what all the posters are saying about the meeting points. And no idea where the march is going to take place, but somewhere in central London, there'll be a great mob of us doing our thing. So I'll be there. For those of you in Bristol, there's going to be one in College Green. I think there's several others taking place in the local area. So participate, get involved. Let's make our voices heard. The thing about protests, it's a form of it's another form of persuasion. It's another form of educating people about what's going on. We can't expect it to necessarily change policy, but we can certainly show that we are here to make our voices heard. And when that is followed by campaigns and other activity, then we can start to move the needle. But people are waking up, and this is our way to show them. So join us in London tomorrow if you can. If not, please share the live stream when I broadcast live tomorrow from the event. And have a wonderful weekend. Peace and love to all of you. Look forward to seeing you again. Our final 2 episodes of the year for Christmas break. We've got Matthias Desmet joining us on Monday and Dr. Peter Chan with us on Tuesday. So look out for 2 fantastic conversations next week. And please look out for the live feed over the weekend. We'll be sharing the events in London live here on the Pandemic Podcast. All right, good night to you for now. If you haven't already subscribed to the Pandemic Podcast, please just take 1 minute of your time to go to danjgregory.com/pandemic. That's danjgregory.com/pandemic. We'll be sharing the details of our forthcoming online community very soon within that community mailing list. And we'll also be sending the details for next week's interviews. So just take a minute of your time if you haven't done so already. danjgregory.com/pandemic. You can join our mailing list. You can also join us on Telegram. Just find us at Pandemic Podcast UK. You'll see the Pandemic Podcast logo. Just go to Pandemic Podcast UK on Telegram and join our Telegram channel. You'll see us there as well. All right, good night for now. I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening.